Okay, so you're prepping a message on 1 Timothy 3, 1-7.
Again?
Again.
Yeah, we've all been there.
We've all been there, right? Every pastor, every Bible study leader has to tackle this one at some point. But
This time you want to go deeper.
this time you want to go deeper.
You want something.
You want to give your congregation something to really chew on. You want to move beyond.
Yeah, you want to move beyond the typical Sunday school answers and really unearth some fresh insights.
Yeah.
You're looking for sermon illustrations that hit home, maybe even some insider baseball on how other pastors have approached this passage in unique ways.
You want to go beyond the basic commentaries and find something that truly sparks new understanding.
That's exactly what we're here for. We dug deep into a fascinating collection of sources, sermons from different denominations, theological deep dives, even some secular history and culture.
Think of this deep dive as your shortcut to a week's worth of sermon prep.
Yeah.
We're about to unearth some seriously thought-provoking stuff.
Let's start with one of the most common phrases in 1 Timothy 3, 1-7, above reproach.
Okay.
It's practically a checklist item for church leadership, but what if we look at it through the lens of ancient Roman society?
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does Roman society change our understanding of above reproach?
Well, in the Roman world, a man's reputation was everything.
Uh-huh.
It determined his influence, his power, even his safety. And think about Julius Caesar. His whole commentaries on the Gallic War was essentially a giant PR campaign boasting about his military achievements to bolster his reputation.
So you're saying that above reproach wasn't just about being a nice guy.
No.
It was about having a reputation so solid, so unassailable that it couldn't be used against you.
Exactly. It was about impeccable character, unwavering integrity. Your entire life had to back up that reputation. And to the Romans, this wasn't just some abstract ideal. It had real-world consequences.
It makes me think about how we view reputation today, especially with social media. It's like everyone's building their own personal commentaries, carefully curating their online image. But how does this Roman understanding of above reproach apply to a pastor in the 21st century? It feels like a completely different world.
It's different, yes, but the core principle remains the same. A pastor's reputation isn't just about avoiding scandal. It's about cultivating a life of such integrity that it becomes a testament to the gospel. Think about it in a world saturated with information where anyone can Google your name and find out everything about you. Your life becomes your most powerful sermon.
That's a great point. It's not just about what you say from the pulpit.
Right.
It's about who you are in every area of life. Your actions, your relationships, your online presence, it all contributes to your reputation and ultimately reflects on the church.
And this leads us to another interesting tension in 1 Timothy 3, 1-7. The emphasis on character versus charisma. It's clear from this passage that the early church valued character over skills or flashiness, sometimes to a radical degree. There's a story about John Calvin that illustrates this perfectly.
John Calvin. I'm all ears. That guy never shied away from controversy.
He certainly didn't. He was a fierce advocate for qualified elders, and he once said that he'd rather see unqualified elders break their necks than lead without walking with God.
Wow, talk about taking a stand. It really shows how seriously they took character and leadership. But does that mean charisma has no place in ministry? Aren't there plenty of dynamic, engaging leaders who also have strong character?
Of course. It's not about demonizing charisma. It's about recognizing that charisma without character is like a house built on sand. It might look impressive at first, but it won't stand the test of time.
So how do we balance these two? How do we make sure we're not drawn to the rock star pastor with thousands of followers while overlooking the quiet, consistent servant leader whose life truly reflects Christ?
It's a crucial question and one that deserves careful consideration. Perhaps we need to reevaluate how we assess leadership, looking beyond the superficial and focusing on the deeper qualities that truly matter. Humility, integrity, a genuine love for God and for people.
It's a good reminder that true leadership isn't about building a platform. It's about building people. Now, there's another phrase in this passage that often raises eyebrows. One woman, man.
Yeah.
It's one of those verses that can feel a bit outdated to a modern audience.
I understand why people might say that, but if we delve into the original Greek, the term used here is incredibly specific. It goes beyond simply avoiding adultery. It speaks of unwavering devotion and fidelity. It's a picture of absolute commitment.
So it's not just a legalistic rule. It's a beautiful illustration of Christ's love for the church. Imagine using that on a wedding sermon. Suddenly, it's not just about what you're not doing. It's about the depth and strength of the love you are demonstrating.
Exactly. It becomes a powerful symbol of Christ's unwavering love and faithfulness.
Yeah.
And speaking of powerful symbols, let's talk about hospitality. In the ancient world, this wasn't just a social nicety, it was a necessity.
Right, there were no hotels back then.
Yeah.
If you were traveling, you relied on the kindness of fellow believers for shelter and safety. What a stark contrast to our modern world of Airbnb and instant booking.
And yet the principle of hospitality remains as relevant as ever. The early church used it to care for each other, spread the gospel, and build community. But fast forward to today, and we're so independent, so self-sufficient.
So how do we translate this ancient concept of hospitality into our modern world? What does radical hospitality even look like in a culture that often prioritizes individualism?
That's a question worth pondering. It might involve welcoming refugees, reaching out to the lonely and isolated, or intentionally building relationships with people who are different from us. The possibilities are endless.
It's like a whole sermon series waiting to happen. We could explore different facets of hospitality from the practical to the spiritual and challenge our congregations to rediscover the true meaning of this often overlooked virtue.
Absolutely. And then there's the overseer analogy, which is a term that can sometimes feel a bit stuffy or outdated.
You're right. It conjures up images of a stern figure lording over the congregation.
Yeah,
But I have a feeling there's more to it than that.
much more. Imagine a bishop in a grand chair, literally overlooking the congregation from a raised platform. That's the image behind the word overseer. It implied authority, yes, but also responsibility and watchfulness.
So it's not just about passively observing, it's about being actively engaged in the lives of your people. It's more about shepherding than dictating.
Precisely. It's about leading by example, being present in the midst of your congregation, and taking a proactive approach to pastoral care. It's about knowing your sheep and being willing to lay down your life for them.
Okay, I'm already seeing how these insights can be woven into a powerful message,
Yeah.
but I have a feeling we've only scratched the surface.
We've only just begun to dig into the depths of 1 Timothy 3:1-7. There are so many more layers to uncover, so many more thought-provoking insights to explore.
Don't worry, we're going to unpack it all. Stay tuned because this deep dive is just getting started.
You know, one of those fascinating things we discovered while prepping for this deep dive is just how many different ways pastors have approached 1 Timothy 3:1-7.
Yeah.
It's not a one-size-fits-all passage.
That's what makes it so intriguing. It's like this ancient text is still speaking to us today, offering fresh perspectives, challenging us to think differently about leadership.
Exactly. And it's not just about the content of the message, it's about the method of delivery.
Yeah.
We came across some truly innovative approaches that really push the boundaries of traditional sermonizing.
Okay, I'm all about pushing boundaries. Give me some examples. What kind of unique approaches did you find?
Well, one sermon we found titled Qualifications for Church Leadership, Living Out the Truth, dove deep into the linguistic nuances of overseer. The Greek word episkopos is also translated as bishop, and it turns out that both episkopos and presbyteros, elder, are used almost interchangeably throughout the New Testament.
Wait, so elders and bishops are
Yeah.
essentially the same thing. That's a new perspective for me.
Yeah.
I always thought they were distinct roles.
Right. It seems like somewhere along the line we started to separate these roles, but in the early church, they were seen as different expressions of the same leadership function.
Oh.
The sermon used this point to emphasize that church leadership is ultimately about serving, not climbing some hierarchical ladder.
I love that. It's a powerful reminder that true leadership is about humility and service, not about titles or positions. It makes me wonder if we've lost sight of that in our modern church culture.
It's a valid concern. And speaking of challenging assumptions, another sermon, Embodying Spiritual Qualities for All Believers, completely different angle. They argued that the qualities listed in 1 Timothy 3:1-7 aren't just for church leaders, they're aspirational for all Christians.
So instead of seeing it as a checklist for pastors, it becomes a blueprint for spiritual growth for everyone in the church. That's an interesting twist.
Exactly. And they used this really creative approach where they paired each quality with a proverb from the Old Testament and then a reflective question for personal application.
Okay.
It was like a mini Bible study built right into the sermon, encouraging the congregation to actively engage with the text.
That's brilliant. It moves beyond passive listening and empowers people to apply these principles to their own lives. It's about equipping the saints, not just entertaining them.
And then there was this other sermon, Everyday Leadership, Influencing with Godliness and Grace, that focused on the self-control aspect of the passage and really gave it a fresh perspective.
Self-control. That is a tough one for most of us. What was their take on it?
They focused on the Greek word for self-controlled, enkratia, which literally means to voluntarily place limitations on one's own freedom.
Whoa, that's deep. So it's not just about resisting that extra slice of cake. It's about making intentional choices to align our desires with God's will.
Precisely. It's about saying yes to God even when it means saying no to our own fleeting impulses. And they connected this to the concept of grace, arguing that it's God's grace that empowers us to live self-controlled lives, not our own willpower.
It's a beautiful reminder that transformation is a work of the Spirit, not a product of our own striving.
Hmm.
I can see how that message would resonate with people who are struggling with self-control in various areas of their lives.
Absolutely. And speaking of struggles, another sermon, Embracing Biblical Masculinity, the call to godly manhood, used some pretty bold illustrations to make their point about leadership.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Bold illustrations. Tell me more.
They actually referenced Julius Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic Wars, not your typical Sunday school material.
No kidding. What was the connection there?
They used Caesar's writings as an example of how even in secular history, we see this emphasis on a man's reputation and achievements as a measure of his worth. And they contrasted this with the biblical concept of masculinity, arguing that true strength comes from godly character, not just worldly success.
So they're saying, look, even the Romans understood the importance of reputation and leadership, but we're called to a higher standard.
Exactly. They challenged the congregation to redefine their understanding of masculinity, looking beyond cultural stereotypes and embracing the qualities of humility, service, and selflessness that marked Jesus' leadership.
It's a powerful challenge, especially in a culture that often equates masculinity with power dominance and aggression. It's a call to reclaim true manhood rooted in the character of Christ.
And they didn't shy away from the consequences of failing to live up to this higher standard. They talked about the fall of the Roman Empire, using it as a cautionary tale about what happens when a society loses sight of strong, godly leadership.
Wow, that's a sobering thought. It connects the seemingly abstract concept of leadership to real-world history and demonstrates the profound impact it has on the trajectory of civilizations.
And they even brought in a quote from Michael Hoff's book, Those Who Remain, which talks about how the strength or weakness of men in a society can have a ripple effect for generations to come.
Yeah.
It's like a call to action, urging men to step up and be the kind of leaders that will leave a legacy of faith and integrity.
It makes you think about the kind of legacy we're leaving, not just in our churches, but in our families and communities as well. Are we investing in the next generation, modeling the qualities of godly leadership? It's a question worth asking ourselves.
And speaking of legacies, one of the most unique sermons we found focused on the idea of the church as a pillar and foundation of truth.
Okay, now that sounds profound.
Yeah.
Where did they go with that?
The sermon, also titled Qualifications for Church Leadership, Living Out the Truth, argued that the church's conduct, its adherence to the truth of Jesus Christ, is literally the foundation upon which truth is supported in the world.
So it's not just about believing the right things, it's about living them out in a way that is visible and compelling to the world.
Exactly. It's a call to authenticity, to embodying the truth in such a way that it becomes a beacon of hope in a world that is often shrouded in darkness and confusion.
It's a high calling for sure. It makes you think about how our actions, both individually and collectively as a church, are constantly being scrutinized by those who are watching from the outside. We're called to be ambassadors of Christ, reflecting his character and truth in a world that desperately needs it.
And that's not all. The sermon also provided some really fascinating historical context for the passage, particularly around the concept of hospitality. Remember how we talked about it being a necessity in the New Testament era?
Yes, it wasn't just about being polite. It was about providing essential care and support for fellow believers who were traveling. It was a vital part of their social fabric.
Exactly. And this practice of hospitality actually played a key role in the spread of the gospel. Travelers would arrive in a new city, find shelter with the local church, and naturally start sharing stories and news from their own communities. It was like a built-in network for sharing the good news.
Wow, that's incredible. It wasn't just about meeting physical needs. It was about fostering spiritual connection and growth.
Yeah.
Hospitality became this organic vehicle for evangelism and discipleship.
And it's a reminder that even seemingly small acts of kindness and generosity can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond our immediate circles. We never know how God might use those acts to touch lives and change hearts.
It makes me wonder how we can reclaim this spirit of hospitality in our modern, often isolated world. How can we use it to build bridges, create community, and share the love of Christ in our own contexts?
It's a challenge worth considering. And speaking of challenges, another sermon we found titled Standards of Godly Pastoral Leadership and Accountability, really highlighted the importance of holding leaders to a high standard.
Mhm.
They argued that the qualifications in 1 Timothy 3, 1-7 are non-negotiable for anyone in ministry.
I appreciate that strong stance, non-negotiable.
Yeah. It's not about checking boxes or just meeting the bare minimum.
Right.
It's about striving for excellence in every area of life as a leader.
Right. And what's fascinating is that they challenge the congregation to hold their leaders accountable to these standards.
That's bold. But you know what? It makes sense. We should expect our leaders to live up to the high calling they've been given. But how can we do that in a healthy way? How do we balance accountability with grace?
That's a great question, and it requires wisdom and discernment. Accountability shouldn't be about judgment or condemnation, but about encouragement and support. It's about creating a culture where leaders can be honest about their struggles and receive the help they need to grow.
It's about walking alongside each other, offering both challenge and support. This sermon also brought in some interesting historical context to emphasize the importance of these standards. They mentioned how in Greek culture, individuals weren't considered mature until the age of 40.
It's a fascinating detail because it sheds light on the reference to Timothy's youthfulness in the passage.
He was probably in his 30s when Paul wrote this letter, so he was relatively young for a leadership position.
So Paul is essentially saying, hey, even though Timothy is young, he has the character and maturity to lead. That's encouraging for all those young pastors out there.
Absolutely. Age isn't the determining factor. It's about the condition of your heart and the integrity of your life.
Mhm.
And speaking of integrity, this sermon also touched on some of the challenges Timothy faced in Ephesus, such as the presence of temple prostitutes.
Right. Ephesus was known for its idolatry and immorality. It must have been incredibly difficult to maintain spiritual purity in such a corrupt environment.
It was. And the sermon used this to highlight the reality that leadership isn't for the faint of heart. It requires constant vigilance and a deep dependence on God's grace to navigate the temptations and pressures that come with the territory.
It makes those qualities we've been discussing, self-control, integrity being above reproach, even more crucial.
Right.
They're not just nice-sounding virtues. They're essential tools for spiritual survival in a world that constantly bombards us with messages that contradict the gospel.
And remember that the Greek word for overseer, episkopos, literally means one who watches over. It's a powerful image of a shepherd who is constantly vigilant, protecting the flock from danger and guiding them toward green pastures.
I love that analogy. It reminds us that leadership is about more than just preaching sermons or managing budgets. It's about caring for people, nurturing their souls, and leading them towards spiritual maturity.
And that care extends beyond the church walls, embodying spiritual qualities for all believers. One of the sermons we looked at used a really cool illustration of how hospitality can be lived out in everyday life. They shared a story about a Christian schools conference where a professor integrated the concept of hospitality into a German language assignment.
Okay, now that's creative. Tell me more about this assignment.
Well, the professor didn't just want his students to learn the language.
Right.
He wanted them to engage with German culture and connect with people who spoke German. He challenged them to find ways to show hospitality, to be proactive in building relationships and learning from others.
That's brilliant. It's taking the abstract concept of hospitality and making it tangible, showing students how to apply it in a real-world setting. It's about going beyond our comfort zones and engaging with the world around us.
Exactly. It's about seeing every interaction as an opportunity to reflect the love of Christ, whether it's with your neighbor, a coworker, or even a stranger in a foreign country. It's about embodying the qualities of 1 Timothy 3, 1-7 in every aspect of our lives.
So we've journeyed from ancient Rome to modern-day challenges, from deep theological analysis to the practicalities of everyday life, all through the lens of 1 Timothy 3, 1-7. It's amazing how much richness and depth we can find in just a few verses of Scripture.
It really is. It speaks to the enduring power of God's Word to speak to us across cultures and centuries, challenging us to live lives that are worthy of the high calling we've received.
And that's what I love about these deep dives. We get to unearth those hidden gems, those unexpected insights that can spark fresh inspiration and reignite our passion for God's truth.
It's about moving beyond the surface level and really wrestling with the text, allowing it to transform our hearts and minds. It's about taking these ancient words and making them relevant and applicable to our lives today.
As we wrap up this deep dive into 1 Timothy 3, 1-7, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We've talked a lot about leaders and the qualities that make for effective and godly leadership. But what if these qualities are for all believers? How can you, in your own unique context, embody these virtues in your daily life? What would it look like to be above reproach in your workplace? to practice radical hospitality in your neighborhood, to cultivate self-control in your personal life.
It's a challenge worth embracing, a journey worth taking. The call to leadership isn't limited to those with official titles or positions. It's a call that resonates in the heart of every follower of Christ, urging us to lead with integrity, serve with humility, and love with abandon.
So go out there and make a difference. One act of love, one moment of grace, one step of faith at a time. That's it for this week's Deep Dive. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and that you'll take some of these insights with you as you continue to study God's Word and live out your faith in the world. Until next time, keep digging deeper, keep asking questions, and keep seeking truth.